Welcome to Liberty Unlocked. I'm Keisha Toni Russell. Today, in honor of October 7th, we are going to discuss some of the things that will lead to tyranny in our country. And we won't talk a lot about what happens once you're in tyranny, but how we get there, how society develops to a place where they allow some evil dictator like Hitler to take over the entire country. I think first we have to begin by understanding that everyone thinks they're right. We all have this inclination to think that we are, in fact, the moral models of society. Our views are the right ones and everybody else's isn't. But if we look at the fruit of our belief systems, the fruit of our emotions, the fruit of what we're saying, you can really see pretty quickly whether you are on the side of the moral right or not. And one of the ways in which I think we can do this is by studying the events that led up to Hitler becoming dictator, and then some of the things that happened in the early days where the people who were around him, the Germans, were really, going through these periods where they felt that they had been treated badly. Some of the things that had happened in World War I. And they wanted revenge, and they were in a situation where they felt that they were being wronged. And Hitler provided the Germans with someone to blame and put him in a position where he could also take out his rage on the Jewish people. So in my book, Uncommon Courage, Defending Truth and Freedom While There's Still Time, I have an entire chapter devoted to supremacy and the idea that once you enter into a space where you believe that you are worth more than someone else, and you begin to dehumanize them, that is when humans start destroying each other, when they start killing each other. And that is what's needed in order to ensure the population will tolerate it. And so in the book, I talk about why it's important to have a conscience that is contrary to tyranny. That means you want to make sure that you're the kind of person that when you see something that's going to erode freedom and destroy, America as we know it, you say something because your conscience is telling you that something is wrong. And generally speaking, the religious are going to have a very strict conscience, and they are often not nearly as, they're just much harder to manipulate because their consciences are grounded in conviction. And that conviction is grounded in belief outside of themselves, outside of their emotions, and it's often sobering. And that's what we need right now. We need people to be sober-minded and to evaluate themselves with sober judgment. And so we're going to look at not just, how Hitler came into power, but why the Germans gave Hitler power in the first place, and the signs, the warning signs that led up to one of the greatest atrocities in world history. So when you look at the Nazis, we're at this point, we're coming out of, Stalinism and that sort of dictatorship, which was much more about the brute force. And Nazi, Germany obviously was about brute force too, but it was also a bit more sophisticated in the sense that it sort of was an evolution of tyranny into this idea of brainwashing, that people are much easier to control if you don't have to physically force them, but you can take over their minds. And then the people will willingly give you what you want, even if it's contrary to their own interests. And so that's what happened in Nazi Germany. Hitler took advantage of the landscape of, how the people were feeling, and he led them to do, to not just do, but also condone a lot of really horrible things. And so with that, Hitler also used propaganda, a lot of messaging to, turn the people who would not agree with the Nazis into the enemy. Hitler did publicly declare being a Christian, and a lot of people use his declarations as some sort of indictment on Christianity, but Hitler was a liar. Hitler was not a Christian, and it's pretty clear that that's the case because of what he did. Okay, the fruit is not that of a Christian person, obviously. Not to mention, we know that Joseph Goebbels, who was Hitler's propaganda minister, he said that there was an insoluble opposition between Nazism and Christianity. And there are millions of reasons for that. We can all sort of make the deductions about why Christianity and Nazism really aren't compatible at all. Not to mention Otto Strasser, who was a confidant of Hitler, has said in his memoirs that Hitler was in fact an atheist. And I think that is pretty obvious when you look at the fact that he really didn't want to be under anyone's rule but his own. He didn't want to be subjected to anyone else's authority. And that obviously includes God, because God would say that everyone is made in his image. And just because you don't like people, you don't get to exterminate them. And so let's get into a couple of great clips from an amazing documentary that is about the Holocaust. It's called The Third Reich, The Rise, and it's a History Channel documentary from 2010. Right now it's on Hulu, and I would recommend, given the anniversary that's upon us of October 7th, that everyone go back and look at this. There is one part called The Rise, and there's another one called The Fall. And we are going to look at The Rise, specifically one specific area. This is going to be in the sort of months before Hitler became dictator, and what the culture was, what the climate was, and what he did in order to incite people to his way.
It was the morning of February 28th, 1933. If you lived in Berlin, you awoke to this. During the night, someone had set fire to Germany's parliament. To this day, no one is certain who set the fire that destroyed the Reichstag. But Hitler knew who he would blame. His rivals, the communists.
No, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. It just matters whether the people believe it.
The Nazi press said that the Reichstag fire was intended as a signal for communist cells across Germany to rise up and revolt.
They wanted to send armed mobs into villages to commit murder and plunder. Hostages would be taken from the middle class. Wives and children of police officers used as human shields. The destruction of all cultural values, just like in Russia.
Hitler had invented a communist threat. Now he would use it to crush his opposition.
Within 24 hours of the fire, it says, freedom of the press, freedom of expression, freedom of public assembly are suspended. So this is what he was able to do right after this fire. And I think this is really important to see how this manipulation is starting to take place and how he's able to start fully controlling the people in such a way that he can start annihilating the Jewish people, which is what he wants. So by about 1934, this propaganda about the Jewish people is really starting to seep into the culture. Okay, you've got in the schools, the kids are learning these songs and all kinds of things that talk about how awful Jewish people are and what you should do to them when you encounter them. Everyone at this point is required to provide a Nazi salute whenever they are in public. And in public, really, everyone was a Nazi. Because you were afraid of being turned in and given over to the officials and taken to a concentration camp. By this point, people were starting to go missing. And, there's nothing but fear and, loyalty. And the final thing I'm going to talk about as we transition from this particular documentary is another speech Hitler gives. And in that speech is when he addressed what he calls the Jewish problem. This is in September of 1934-ish. And he says that this Jewish problem needs a legislative solution. All right, so that is important because that is typically how people of faith get attacked. And people who are pushing back against the current narrative get attacked through legislative power, through governmental enforcement. So that's why this whole idea that Christians are not supposed to get involved in politics just really makes no sense at all, because when Christians are persecuted, it's likely going to come from the government, or it's going to be persecution that comes from a private citizen, which the government upholds or supports. And so that's important. So when I start talking about, in my book about supremacy, I kind of walk through what happens in Nazi Germany. I talk about the propaganda and everything, and how people were really primed for this, and how slowly but surely, Hitler was able to just knock off the conscience of all these people, to basically sear it. And they started, condoning things that human beings should never condone, and in some cases participating in those things. But they're warning signs, right? When a society is primed for deception by a tyrant, and those warning signs include just incredible division, unhappiness from at least one segment of or one political party or something like that, and the constant dehumanization. Once you get to a point where you see people are constantly dehumanizing one segment of the population, this is when stuff like what we saw in the Holocaust, can happen, because that means you have a lot of people who are willing to see certain people die because they don't like them. And that's why keeping your conscience is such an important thing to do, because propaganda and your emotions even will tell you that your conscience needs to be numbed and needs to be quieted. Because when you see someone get shot in front of millions of people and you don't feel compassion for that, that means your conscience has been ignored and seared. And that's the part of you really need to get back in order to maintain your humanity and your convictions, which every Christian should have. So we have to be very diligent about guarding our consciences. We have to be willing to listen to it, even when it contradicts our emotions, even when it contradicts what people are saying on TV. And, what we have learned from when a whole group of people have decided their consciences are not more important than their political agenda or their wrath, these angry people will push all of its members to appoint someone to carry out its rage against the other group. And we see this in the Bible in Daniel 6. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but we all remember what happened in that story where Daniel, there were people who were very jealous of him, and they, went to the religious leaders of the time and basically said, we don't like this guy, Daniel. I'm going to show you just a quick picture. And asked the king to create an edict, a law that said that he couldn't pray the way he prays. He could only pray to the king. He could only honor the king. And here you see Daniel with his blinds open, making sure everyone sees him worshiping God, the one and only true God, rather than, this king. And we know he gets in trouble for this. He ends up in the lion's den, and he does survive. But this is just sort of showing you that the persecution does come from the government. That's exactly what's happening here. The people who hate people of faith, Christians, Jews, whatever it is, will go to the powers that be and ask for laws that are designed to target these people, because they will not go with the flow. They will not, bow down to whatever that particular culture wants them to do in that moment. And in large part, they don't want them. They don't want to bow down because their conscience tells them that they shouldn't. I think that COVID was a really interesting thermometer for our society, because you have the crisis, which allows, any sort of leader to play on people's emotions in order to get people to agree that certain restrictions on freedom, just exactly what happened after that fire in Berlin, the people will then begin to support those restrictions because they think it will either keep them safe or, make society better in some way. And they don't. And so at the time of COVID, First Liberty Institute was working really hard to figure out how we were going to help houses of worship during that time. And so we represented synagogues and churches all over the country who were being shuttered, even though, there were states in which there were bars open and strip clubs open, but the churches couldn't be open for the people who were comfortable enough to go in person. We also represented a church that wanted to meet outside in their cars. The pastor would preach from a stage through AM, FM frequency, and you could hear it in your car. And the mayor of Louisville banned it, that practice, even though there's no way you can catch COVID by sitting in the car. But because that pastor is really trying to keep his congregation together and encourage. But it's, these kinds of crises bring out that kind of like hate and bias in people, and especially in the leaders. And so we followed the case, and we did end up winning. And that particular church worshiped on Easter Sunday, which was just an amazing win. It's one of the most memorable things I've ever experienced at First Liberty. It was really powerful. But the point I'm trying to make is that, we saw a lot of anti-religious animus, a lot of anti-Christian animus, a lot of, animus towards people of faith that even came from the Biden administration. Now, not everyone who didn't want to get vaccinated was religious, but a lot of people who didn't want to get vaccinated were religious, a lot of them. And this, I think, gave a lot of people the opportunity to persecute people of faith, to demonize them, because they were already mad at them because of some of the other issues that people of faith are not in line with, usually, particularly Christians. They're not going to be in line with a lot of the things that, people leftists believe. And that makes us susceptible to their hate and their rage. Let's listen to a little bit of Joe Biden at the time he's president. And this is how he's talking about people who don't want to get vaccinated.
Expanded testing and identify people who are infected. We can and we will turn the tide on COVID-19. It'll take a lot of hard work. It's going to take some time. Many of us are frustrated with the nearly 80 million Americans who are still not vaccinated, even though the vaccine is safe, effective, and free. While the vaccines provide strong protection for the vaccinated, we read about and hear about and we see the stories of hospitalized people on their deathbeds among the unvaccinated over the past few weeks. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. The unvaccinated overcrowd our hospitals, are overrunning emergency rooms and intensive care units, leaving no room for someone with a heart attack or pancreatitis or cancer.
So we know now that a lot of what he's saying in this clip is not true, and those statistics weren't true when he was saying them. But this is a good way for them to completely demonize people who didn't want to agree. And I represented a lot of religious clients who were forced to either take the vaccine or get fired, including dozens of Navy SEALs who we represented and were able to vindicate through a Fifth Circuit win.
This is not about freedom or personal choice. It's about protecting yourself and those around you, the people you work with, the people you care about, the people you love. My job as president is to protect all Americans. So tonight, I'm announcing that the Department of Labor is developing an emergency rule to require all employers with 100 or more employees that together employ over 80 million workers to ensure their workforces are fully vaccinated or show.
All right. So you get the picture there. A lot of demonizing of this one group of people who don't want to get vaccinated, even though everybody gets COVID, whether vaccinated or not, and we know that. And there was a time when conservatives couldn't even say that, even though it was 100% true. And so here we have sort of the leader using this as an opportunity to demonize people who really are not to blame for that issue. And it's not the first time, won't be the last. And this is how it begins. You sort of inject the population with this hatred and this rage. You direct it at this group of people, and then you go to town, either with the social extermination, like a lot of us saw for the last couple of years, where we were ostracized and treated badly and fired and all kinds of things for having religious objections to, progressive ideology in many ways, not just about COVID, but about a lot of things. And, we throughout the last few years, I think it's been pretty clear that many people have lost their ability to still connect with people who don't agree with them. And these examples are obviously, the Holocaust is an extreme example, but it's a very real thing. And we are not above the Germans who allowed this to happen. We are the same kind of people. Okay. As a matter of fact, I actually think Americans are much weaker than the Germans were at that point in their lives, because we're way comfortable. We have, the Germans were really going through some things at that point because of World War I. I'm talking about, just the regular society, the German people at that point. And so they really were susceptible to it. At this point, Americans we're still, living pretty well. We're still the richest nation in the world and the whole thing. So a lot of our luxuries, I think, make us much weaker, mentally and emotionally and spiritually. And so we shouldn't assume that what happened in Germany could never happen here, because we're so much better than those people. And what I'm trying to show you by giving you these examples, and not out of Daniel, out of COVID, but there are so many others. The last one, of course, being Charlie Kirk's death and the way people reacted to that. That means these people's hearts are completely seared. How can you defend or celebrate that? And I've heard people who say, okay, I wouldn't celebrate that, but you can understand how some people might think it's just. That is wicked. For that to even come into your mind, that there is anything about what happened to that man that is just, it's so problematic. And that's one of the reasons why the Bible says that we need to evaluate ourselves with sober judgment. We need to be able to look at ourselves with a clear mind and say, is this a reaction? Is this thought? Are these words coming out of my mouth demonstrating that I have a heart of flesh and I'm, connected to God, and I, love people the way God has asked me to? Or am I so emotionally driven, so self-absorbed that the only thing I care about is how someone made me feel, or what I perceive to be their personality or their character, who they are? It's just keeping our consciences is vital, lest we become the new Nazis who wage death upon people who we don't like. And this is not a hypothetical. We know that, Winsome Sears just came out against Winsome Sears is running for governor of Virginia. She's lieutenant governor right now. She's amazing. I know her personally, and when I tell you that she is a woman of God, and she is a true patriot, and she loves America, and she is just such a passionate fighter for liberty. I can say that knowing her and the way she's treated me. And, one day I'll tell you guys the story of how I met Winsome Sears. But anyway, she has just come out and talked about the Democratic nominee for the AG, Jay Jones, this young Democrat. He's only 36 years old. He actually looks like a baby, but he has some text messages that were released of him talking about killing Republicans and killing the children of a Republican, calling them little fascists. I mean, the utter extreme dehumanization that is going on is really, really dangerous. And when you couple something like what's going on with him, someone who wants to be in elected office, who wants to be the top cop for the state of Virginia, to be talking like this, to be speaking like this, can you imagine what happens when conservatives get in trouble and he has the power to decide what happens to them? This man is showing you that he hates conservatives so much that he wants to see them die. That is dangerous. And he's not the only one who feels that way, because I can tell you, I have not seen too many Democrats. I've seen none actually come out against him. He issued this like pseudo ridiculous thing that was supposed to resemble an apology and was not. And he's still in the running. the Democratic candidate for governor for Virginia won't drop him when she absolutely should. But it's because these people identify with this feeling, and that's problematic. And we should be paying close attention to what's going on right now, because we've reached an alarming level. But I just want to play this tribute that the White House made of Charlie Kirk.
America, is it possible to say, you know what, I don't like the way the country is going, and to do something about it? Take that risk, take that leap of faith, stay involved, trust God, and act obediently. Romans 12:2 verse, that God will use all things for good for those who love him. It's bigger than you. I want you to remember that. It is bigger than you. It's bigger than me. You are here to make somebody else's life better, the pursuit of liberty and freedom. You know what gives me strength? The hundreds of thousands of you that say, Charlie, keep going.
1 Corinthians 5 and 15. So that's all pretty amazing evidence, not just intra-biblical evidence, but extra-biblical evidence that Jesus Christ was a real person. He lived a perfect life. He was crucified, died, and rose on the third day, and he is Lord and God of all.
Yeah. So sad. All right. With that, I leave you with the thought of reminding you that we are to evaluate ourselves with sober judgment, and I will ask you to do that. And I'll see you next time. If you like this video, you'll love my book, Uncommon Courage, Defending Truth and Freedom While There is Still Time. The audiobook is out, and it is in my voice. All you have to do is go to Apple Books or Audible and give it a listen. Let me know what you think.